The movie opens with a rain-soaked Anne, her eyes closed, allowing the downpour to wash over her. Water drips poetically down her skin as she stands there, fully immersed. The scene then transitions to Anne and Laurie working together, their shift dragging on until they finally head home in the middle of the night, parting ways. Anne picks up her mom, and they chat during the drive, their conversation filling the car. After dropping her mom off, Anne bids her goodnight and heads to the trailer in her mom's backyard where she lives. Inside, Don lies asleep, but Anne wakes him, nudging him to make room for her. As she snuggles in, Don notices her chilled feet and sets out to warm them up. He vigorously rubs his palms together, generating heat, and applies gentle pressure to her feet. He even blows warm air onto them, all in a bid to warm up Anne's cold feet. Anne teases him, her voice playful, that she's cold all over her body, beckoning Don in for a tender kiss. The next day, Anne and Don get themselves and the kids ready for school, starting with breakfast and then getting them dressed. Don leaves with the kids while Anne stays back at home, putting things together in the trailer, when all of a sudden she passes out. On the other hand, her mother is outside doing laundry and decides to check up on Anne, calling out for her from outside the trailer. When she gets no response, she walks inside. The scene shifts, and we see Anne in the hospital, worried about her daughters, Penny and Patsy, her children whom she needs to pick up from school. She pleads with a nurse to help inform her mother, who came with her to the hospital, to help her go pick up her children when it's time. After a long wait in the reception, the other patients around her begin to disappear one by one, leaving only Anne unattended. Later, after a long moment of anxious waiting and walking up and down the aisle, a nurse approaches her. Anne inquires if the previous nurse delivered her message to her mom. The nurse's nonchalance aggravates Anne, who expresses her concern about her kids being cold and alone by the school's gate, watching other children get picked up by their parents, with no sight of their own mother arriving, unaware that she's stuck in the hospital. With a slight attitude, the nurse reluctantly agrees to find Anne's mother and deliver the message. Finally, Anne gets to see the doctor, a man who goes by the name Thompson. He lays her down while he runs some checks on her. To sway her attention off him, he inquires about the kids. She expresses her earlier frustration about not being able to get anyone to tell her mom to go pick them up. The doctor begins to perform an ultrasound on her as he watches the display on the screen. Anne, who's still worried about her children's well-being, inquires from the doctor as more doctors walk into the room, but Dr. Thompson reassures her. After the test, Dr. Thompson and Anne have a chat in the hallways. The doctor begins questioning Anne with random questions like her star sign, but Anne is just curious about what the doctor has to say. Finally getting to the heart of the matter, the doctor reveals that multiple scans have detected tumors in both of her ovaries, which have spread to her liver. The doctor explains that if she were older, the spread would be slower and could be operated on, but her cells are too young and nothing can be done about it, and she has at most 3 months to live. As the doctor's words sink in, Anne's eyes well up with tears. She had been hoping to hear news of a pregnancy, but instead she's faced with the devastating reality of a tumor. Her dreams of motherhood seem to slip away as she struggles to process the diagnosis. Dr. Thompson's eyes also mist with tears as he reveals the difficulty he faced in sharing the life-altering news with Anne. His empathetic demeanor shows the emotional toll it takes on him to deliver such a challenging diagnosis and the weight of his responsibility as a doctor. Anne steps out of the hospital, her heart still heavy from the diagnosis. But before heading home, she makes a quick call to her mother to check in on the kids. Her mother reassures her that they're safe and sound, and Anne breathes a sigh of relief. As she arrives home late in the night, she's greeted by the warm sight of her husband, Don, reading a bedtime story to their children. The kids' eyes light up as they excitedly chatter about the fries and milkshakes Don treated them to, proudly declaring they devoured every last bite. Anne takes a moment to join in on the fun, scooping up her little ones in tight hugs and playful cuddles. She savors the joy and innocence of this moment, letting the love and laughter of her family envelop her. For a brief respite, she sets aside the weight of her diagnosis and simply enjoys being present with her loved ones. Anne sits down with her husband, Don, and they share a gentle conversation. He excitedly shares his plans for their upcoming vacation, scheduled for the next month. Anne listens to the man talk about his hopes and ambitions. Later on, seeking some solitude, Anne makes her way to a cafe. She settles into a cozy seat and orders a piece of pineapple cheesecake. As she waits for her dessert to arrive, she pulls out a notebook and begins to write. At first, the words flow slowly, but soon her pen moves with purpose. Anne starts creating a bucket list, scribbling down all the things she wants to experience and achieve before her time runs out. Anne is overwhelmed with a mix of desperation and determination as she writes, her heart racing with a newfound sense of urgency. As Anne continues writing in her notebook, a stranger across the table watches her intensely. The waitress arrives with her order and sets down the cheesecake and coffee. As she hands Anne her treats, the waitress shares her own plans and dreams of getting surgery if she wins the lottery. Anne listens attentively, offering a supportive smile. Anne's morning unfolds as usual the next day, as she gets her kids ready for school. After she watches her kids leave for school, Anne attempts to begin her bucket list journey, so she visits a salon. However, the stylist is all on her own, as she usually is on Wednesdays, so Anne promises to come back next time. As night falls, Anne sticks to her routine and picks up her mother from work. She arrives at her trailer and finds everyone fast asleep. Not wanting to disturb them, Anne decides to step out and visit a nearby lounge to pass the time. As she settles into the lounge, she's surprised to see the hairdresser from the salon earlier that day. The hairdresser recognizes Anne and approaches her, apologizing for being off when Anne visits the salon earlier. She explains that she was having a chaotic morning, which threw her off her game. Anne listens understandingly. The hairdresser further opens up to Anne about her struggles of being a stylist and the pressure that comes with it from clients. Anne reassures her that she didn't have a great morning either. They slowly transition to small talk, like music, where Anne reveals that she met Don, her husband, at a music concert. Soon the hairdresser excuses herself to go meet her DJ friend, and Anne watches the two dance the night away from across her table. Later that night, Anne trudges into the laundry mart, exhaustion etched on her face. She settles into a chair, waiting for her laundry to finish its cycle in the washing machine. As she sits, a man prepares to leave his seat next to her, on his way to grab a cup of coffee. But instead of walking away, he pauses and turns to Anne, offering to get her a cup as well. At first, Anne declines, but she reconsiders and accepts his offer, just before he's about to walk out the door. As the night wears on, Anne's eyelids grow heavy, and she drifts off to sleep surrounded by the gentle hums of the washing machine. She wakes up in the morning to the realization that the kind stranger who had offered her coffee has helped her wash, dry, and fold out her laundry. He recognized her from the cafe as he was the one watching her while she wrote in her journal. He offers her his jacket to protect her from the cold outside. Since Anne is in a rush to go and tend to her kids, the man hands her laundry, which he has packed together. He introduces himself as Lee, and she reciprocates, introducing herself as Anne. She leaves and promises to return his jacket to him when she gets the chance. Anne walks home, lost in thought as she navigates the streets. Her mind wanders to the fragility of life, pondering how quickly the world would continue spinning without her. She imagines the bustling streets, the shops, and the restaurants, all continuing to thrive, indifferent to her absence. When she arrives at her mother's home, she is met by her kids, who are being told a story by their grandma. Her mother informs Anne that she has bathed and fed them. Anne's moment of peace is short-lived, as she finds herself at odds with her mother over the story she told the kids. Anne's discomfort sparks a gentle argument, with her mother accusing her of acting just like her father. Anne swiftly counters, claiming that she's actually acting exactly like her mother, a trait she wishes she could shake off. The tension is palpable, but Anne knows she needs to prioritize her children. She gathers Patsy and Penny, scooping them up in her arms, and bids her mother farewell as she walks back to her trailer. In the trailer, Anne does Patsy's hair and gets the two set for bed. She tucks them both in and turns off the light, as she kisses them goodnight. Don returns home while Anne is doing the dishes. She serves him some leftover chicken to have for dinner. He asks after the kids, and she expresses her concern about Penny. Earlier, while she was getting the two ready for bed, Penny was teasing her sister Patsy and criticizing her about her whining and complaining uncontrollably. Anne had swiftly intervened, reprimanding Penny for picking on her sister. Anne is about to leave for her night shift when Don suddenly pulls her close to himself, holding her tight, and begs that she sing him a song. She begins to sing to the man, gently rubbing his hair, with his head on her shoulder, and she eventually leaves. As she settles into her vehicle, Anne's thoughts turn to her daughters, and she begins recording birthday wishes for Penny's future celebrations. Anne's words are a heartfelt mixture of love, guidance, and encouragement. She urges Penny to be a good big sister to Patsy, acknowledging that it won't always be easy. Anne knows Patsy can be challenging at times, but she has faith in Penny's kindness and resilience. As she concludes the recording, Anne sends kisses and love to her precious daughter. Anne's emotional recording session continues as she moves on to create a message for Patsy's 5th birthday. Her voice, still trembling with emotion, is filled with love and reassurance as she speaks to her young daughter. She pours her heart out, ensuring Patsy knows how much she's loved and cherished. As the recordings progress, Anne creates multiple messages for her daughter's future birthdays, each one a testament to her enduring love and devotion. With every message, Anne's voice grows stronger, her words infused with a sense of purpose. She not only reassures her daughters of her love, but also offers guidance and wisdom. Anne's instructions are laced with a deep understanding of life's complexities, as she encourages her daughters to remain open to their grandmother and father. She gently prepares them for the possibility of Don remarrying, urging them to accept and love whoever he chooses to share his life with. She urges them to persevere in their education, even when the journey gets tough and the purpose seems obscure. Her words are a gentle reminder that the struggles are temporary and the rewards will be worth it. As she finishes recording, Anne steps out of the vehicle, her emotions overwhelming her. She stands at the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy as she struggles to contain her tears. The smoke from her cigarette drifts away, carried by the breeze, as she tries to compose herself. The scene shifts to Anne at work, methodically mopping the floors, her mind elsewhere. Suddenly, a wave of nausea washes over her, and she rushes into the bathroom, barely making it to the sink before she vomits. Her coworker Lori, concerned by Anne's sudden departure, follows her into the bathroom. A gentle inquiry from Lori unlocks a floodgate of emotions for Anne as she begins to vent to her friend. Anne begins to pour out her heart, sharing the struggles and difficulties she faced throughout her life. She speaks of feeling like an outcast growing up, of becoming a mother at 17 and having to hastily learn maturity, of sacrificing her own hopes and dreams. Anne's words spill out in a cathartic torrent as she shares the pain of losing her father to jail and the ache of not hearing from him since. Her coworker listens attentively, offering a supportive ear, and for the first time in a long time, Anne feels a sense of relief wash over her. A therapeutic session for Anne as the bathroom, once a place of mere necessity, has become a sanctuary for Anne's emotional release. Later, Anne goes to see Lee. She calls him on the phone, and he directs her to his home. When she arrives, she gets into his apartment, but is surprised to see that he doesn't have any furniture, nor anything to offer her, not even a basic treat like cookies. In his defense, he wasn't informed early enough about her arrival. She's curious as to what happened that he has no furniture, and he just claims that someone took it. Lee's resourcefulness turns a pile of books into a makeshift chair, and they both sit down, creating a sense of makeshift comfort in the sparse room. Defense Anne's curiosity gets the better of her, and she asks Lee about his experiences in Alaska, remembering his earlier mention of being accustomed to cold weather. Lee shares that he works as a surveyor, and his profession has taken him to various parts of the world. Anne proudly shows Lee a picture of her two daughters, and he admires their sparkling eyes, commenting on the joy and ecstasy that radiates from them. He compliments Anne on her beauty, saying that her daughters resemble her. As they continue talking, Lee reveals that Anne has been on his mind a lot lately, almost too much. He then invites her to his car to listen to some music, and Anne accepts without hesitation. The tension builds as Lee and Anne sit in the car, the music playing softly in the background. The rain outside creates a cozy atmosphere, but also adds to the sense of intensity. They gaze into each other's eyes, the air thick with anticipation. Anne, caught up in the moment, her emotions raw and exposed, threatens to scream if Lee doesn't kiss her. Lee hesitates, his eyes searching hers, and then Anne lets out a loud scream, the sound echoing through the car. Lee's reaction is swift, his hands reaching out to pull Anne in, his lips crashing down on hers in a passionate kiss. The tension explodes into a fiery passion, the music and rain fading into the background as they lose themselves in the moment. The next day, Anne goes to see her doctor after ditching their appointment for the previous week. He informs her of his plan to take more biopsy tests on her, but Anne immediately declines. She expresses how the tests are pointless and doesn't want any of them if they're not going to save her. The doctor is now curious. If she's not there for the tests, what then is she there for? Anne reveals a package to him. It contains the recordings she made, and she wants him to be the one to give them to her daughters on their birthdays, till they turn 18. Thompson is curious as to why she didn't just hand this to her husband to give it to them. Anne fears that Don won't be consistent enough to give them each year, or he'd be too careless with it, so it only makes sense for an organized man like Dr. Thompson to be in charge of the recordings. Anne won't take no for an answer from the doctor, however. He insists he'll only do it if she promises to take her appointments with him seriously and let him administer her medication to her, to help with the nausea. To him, kicking the bucket doesn't have to be excruciatingly painful or exhausting. Anne just fears that if she frequently visits the hospital, she might never make it out of it, and might just kick the bucket in the hospital, which she doesn't want for her kids. She has so much planned before she passes on, and she must see those plans through. The doctor reassures her that he'd only administer painkillers to her, to ease the pain, and won't carry out any more tests on her again. He hands her a bag of candies, just as he had promised the last time, and then he takes the box of recordings from her and promises to look after them. Sometime later, while Anne is busy working her shift with Laurie, she invites Laurie for dinner. Since she's on a diet, she instructs Anne to make her diet food alone. As Anne walks through the aisle at the grocery store, she can't shake the thought of people being carefree from the harmful chemicals in the products and food items they buy. Anne eventually reaches home and prepares dinner for the family and her guest. As everyone's seated at the dining table, Laurie is just blown away by the tenderness of the chicken ribs Anne made. She inquires as to how Anne got the ribs to be so soft, and Anne reveals to her the technique of leaving the chicken soaked in milk in the refrigerator for an hour. As Anne joins them at the table, she offers Laurie the sauce Dawn made. Laurie is fascinated by the fact that Dawn can cook. Dawn, on the other hand, being modest, claims he just added honey to the already made barbecue sauce. However, Laurie still finds this impressive. Laurie, who is curious as to how the couple met, inquires from them, and they narrate how they met at a Nirvana concert. While smiles fill the room, Penny, who has just been staring at Laurie throughout dinner, as if finally letting her intrusive thoughts win, Penny blurts out loudly, randomly calling Laurie a p. This comes as a shock to everyone at the table, as all eyes open widely, leaving an offended Laurie, too stunned to speak. Later that night, Anne and Dawn laugh about the earlier incident at the dinner table. Dawn thinks Penny was right for calling Laurie a p, as she alone finished 6 huge ribs. However, Anne defends her friend, claiming she's just a nice person. Dawn thinks Anne has been the complete opposite of a nice person of late, but Anne blames her behavior on anemia, and she has to go to the hospital to get vitamins. Dawn volunteers to go with her but can manage without him. Dawn feels having dinner that night and talking about how they first met has made him realize how lucky he is to have her. Despite not giving Anne the life she would like or deserves, she has never complained, not once. He appreciates that and would like to be better for her. She reassures him of her love for him, and they fall asleep in each other's arms. The next day, Penny and Patsy meet a neighbor who is outside gardening. Both of them cosplay as witches, and the woman is fascinated by them as she inquires more about their craft. Just then, Anne arrives, and she exchanges pleasantries with the newly arrived neighbor, who coincidentally bears the name Anne. She compliments Penny and Patsy and calls them sweet. Anne feels embarrassed asking her neighbor whom she's just met to look after her children while she steps out for a short while, but she does anyway. Her neighbor doesn't mind and is excited to look after them, more excited about the spells Penny promised to teach her. Anne is grateful and she bids goodbye to her kids while she leaves. Anne goes to meet Lee, who had been awaiting her arrival for a while. He's glad she came as he thought for a second that she didn't want to see him anymore. The two stand on the road, a sense of tension and anxiety in the air as Lee engages Anne in a dance with him. As they dance slowly, the two kiss. Meanwhile, Anne, the new neighbor, is doing well with the kids, telling them fascinating stories, which they enjoy as smiles fill the room and their faces are lit and fixed on her. Shortly, their mother arrives. She apologizes for keeping them waiting so long. However, she isn't greatly missed as Anne, the neighbor, kept them company by doing their hair and telling them interesting stories. They're even eager for her to finish telling them the story the next day. Anne appreciates her kind neighbor for being of help to her, and they leave. Their friendship only skyrockets from then as the next day, while doing laundry, the two Annes meet and decide to spend the day having coffee together. As the two talk, Anne finds out from her neighbor that she's a nurse who is single and skeptical about kids, even though she compliments Anne about her children. On the topic of children, Anne, the nurse, shares an experience she had with Siamese twins who passed away in her arms. It's a somber moment between the two, as they're both led to tears. Anne immediately feels bad for creating such a melancholic atmosphere and attempts to leave. However, Anne invites her for dinner, convincing her to come as Penny and Patsy would love to have her around. Anne agrees to visit soon. Meanwhile, Anne and Lee continue their odd affair together. The two stay wrapped tightly in each other's arms, sharing tender kisses and small talk. One day, while they're together, Anne begs him to read her a book, and when he begins to, the words are immediately triggering to her, and she snatches the book from his hands and throws them away. It's Anne's mom's birthday. Anne picks her mother up that night, bearing more than birthday wishes, but a sensitive topic they need to discuss: her father. Anne wants to know about his whereabouts. Her mother is curious if she wants to see him, though she claims to be unfazed by whatever decision may be. However, an act of nonchalance leads the old woman to express emotions she had bottled up for a while, and Anne offers her comfort in her time of sorrow. Eventually, Anne gets her nails done at the salon, as the nail technician is finally available. Anne finishes and goes to the counter to pay the hairdresser. Just as the stylist hopes that Anne will be visiting soon, she negates that but compliments the hairdresser's braids, claiming they suit her. Like the sense of validation the hairdresser might have hoped for, a smile beams on her face, as she appreciates Anne's kind words. Later, Anne goes to visit her father in jail. He's pleased to see her. She shows him a picture of his grandchildren, informing him of their respective ages, being 4 and 6. When he inquires about her husband Don, she tells him about his job, that he builds swimming pools. Her father boasts of having a job there too. He sews sports shoes together. It's a nostalgic moment between the two, who are separated by a thick glass, as they reminisce about the moments when he was still free and the times they spent together. Anne instructs her father to take care of himself. He tells her to send him the shoe sizes of his granddaughters so he can make sports shoes for them. She hangs up the phone and leaves the sad old man, all by himself. As time goes on, Anne's condition gets worse. Don is concerned about her health and suggests that they go see another doctor, as he's skeptical about her condition being anemia at all. She reassures him that it's only just anemia, that she's taking vitamins that will help, and also that all she needs is bed rest and she'd be fine. Don kisses her goodbye and leaves with the kids, who are running late for school. Later, Anne makes a recording for Don explaining why she didn't tell him about her actual health condition. In her defense, it was to save him and the kids from all the stress and anxiety it would cause them. And to her, withholding the truth from them is like a present from her to them. Anne makes more recordings, this time to her mother, instructing her to reassure her grandchildren of the love their grandmother has for them. The scene shifts to Anne and Lee together in Lee's car, as they're on their way to a restaurant. They arrive soon enough, and while they eat, Lee reveals to Anne that there are so many places he'd like to take her to. Anne is curious about these places and makes him tell her all about it. He does so enthusiastically. Places in Argentina, Mexico, and Alaska that he'd love for her to see. However, Anne is sorry to disappoint Lee that she's not going to see these places. Lee is confused as to what the matter is, but she's instantly uncomfortable and wants to leave. After, while the two are outside, Lee confesses his love for Anne. Despite Don's presence in Anne's life, Lee wants to spend the rest of his life with Anne, as well as take care of her and her children. However, it just won't work out between them. It's not meant to be. It's a painful goodbye for the two, as they find it difficult to separate from each other. Eventually, Lee walks into his car, where he sits and watches Don arrive to pick up Anne. Lee is in tears as he watches from a distance. The woman he loves leave with another man, her husband. Later, Anne, who had invited her kind neighbor home for dinner, is too sick to host. However, her neighbor doesn't mind, as she helps Don out in the kitchen. Anne watches from the bed, in the other room, as her neighbor prepares dinner, and the atmosphere is lit with joy. She subtly wishes that this could be how life without her would be. Anne, her neighbor, and Don, living happily with Penny and Patsy. In the end, Anne passes away, and life without her is just as she had hoped. Her mother finally gives dating a chance. Lee gets her recording and takes her advice to paint his walls and buy some furniture. Penny and Patsy love Anne, maybe not as much as they would have loved their mother, but they welcome her into Don's life, as well as theirs, just as their mother wanted.